I'm Adrienne Peterson, the school principal of St. Matthew's Catholic School. We are partnering with Parent Education Series, as you can see behind Charlene's screen. We have worked exclusively with Charlene for the past few years, and Charlene's company brings high quality presenters and works for parents in schools, and she has a partnership going on. They're phenomenal. We've had nationally known speakers, people who've done compassion to resilience to all kinds of topics, and we have always found that Parent Education Series has never not provided us with a solid presenter, and I'm looking forward to this evening. Deborah Kris, I know we're all going to be a little bit brave. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be brave as once we hear and get inspired tonight and learn some stuff. It is in partnership that we raise these children, and we are so grateful that you have entrusted your child with St. Matthew, and we want to show our appreciation and thanks and provide you with a wonderful speaker. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the founder, Charlene, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. As always, we are thrilled to be here with you tonight in St. Matthew Catholic School. It is a real honor. When Dr. Peterson reached out to us a few years ago, we were like, yes, of course we want to help you. And your mission is so aligned with what we do. We could not be more excited to be here. Special thanks tonight to our presenter, Deborah Farmer Kris. And tonight's topic is Good Sense for Parents, Raising Kids Who Are Kind and Brave. We know that you have a focus at St. Matthew on character education, and that is one of Deborah's specialties. So again, we could not be more delighted tonight. This is a webinar format. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that by now, but just I'll point out at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you have both a chat button and a Q&A button. We would like you to use the chat button to communicate with us, to make comments, share remarks with each other. But for questions, we ask that you put those in the Q&A button. So again, resource links, my partner Bev Hartman will be putting resources in the chat. Feel free to reach out, talk to each other, talk to us, and then questions at any time during the event, put those in the Q&A button. Tonight, we will have about 45 minutes of content, followed by 15 minutes for Q&A, where we really want to hear from you, the audience. So send us your questions, put those in the Q&A. We can't wait to hear from you. Let me tell you a little bit about tonight's featured speaker. Deborah Farmer Kris is a child development expert and parent educator. She serves as a columnist and consultant for PBS KIDS, and she writes for NPR's Mindshift and other national publications. Over the course of her career, Deborah has taught almost every grade from K through 12, served as a school administrator, directed leadership institutes, and presented to, by now, probably thousands of parents and educators around the United States. Deborah and her husband live in Massachusetts. She's actually here tonight on East Coast time. A nor'easter knocked out her power, but she still found her way to school with their two children who love to test every theory she's ever had about child development. Mostly, she loves sharing nuggets of practical wisdom that can help kids and families thrive. Please join me in a really warm welcome virtually for Deborah Farmer Kris. Thank you, Deborah. Take it away.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here tonight. Today went nothing as planned. I woke up to no power at 3 a.m. as a massive tree fell in our neighborhood. There was water in the basement. I realized quickly that I had nothing for the kids to eat that didn't require the microwave except for goldfish and fruit strips and some apples. And then I had an emergency trip to the vet for my cute little dog who decided to eat something that he shouldn't. And here I am in a school that I had a school so kindly let me be here. And before I came, the kids and I were eating takeout with my husband in a 55-degree room, and with some cheap flashlights I picked up at CVS because I couldn't find my other flashlights. And my son said, who's 7, can we play Uno? So we sat around in the dark and we played Uno, and it was fabulous. It was this beautiful kind of magical time in the midst of this day that I had been, in my head thinking about everything going wrong and how I couldn't go over my slides because I didn't have internet and I didn't have power. And it just reminded me that parenting so often is these mixtures of highs and lows. And when those good small moments, that Uno game with a kid comes along, taking the time to savor that is really the thing that gets you through those other moments. So I'm really, really happy that I could be here tonight. Thank you. And to get us started, I want to get us all centered. And I want you to think about someone in your life that you truly admire, that when you think of them, you think that's a really good person. And if I were able to sit down with you, because I love interviewing people, it's part of what I do as an education journalist, I would say, well, tell me about this person. And if you could give me one word that you think could capture that person, one word or phrase, if you'd be willing to take 30 seconds in the chat and just put down, when you think of that person, a word that encapsulates them. What word comes to mind? Take a moment, and if you haven't had a chance, scroll through. Because when we talk about character, and I have been studying character at a kind of scholarly level, I've also affiliated for 20 years with the Boston University Center for Character and Social Responsibility. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the philosophy, but when we talk about character, this is what we're talking about. It's right here. It's this essence of a person that is forged over a lifetime, keratos, this idea of being able to chisel kind of who you are through good habits over time. And so this very much came to my mind as I was thinking this weekend about the presentation, because we had the memorial service for my father-in-law who passed away a few months ago. And we finally were all gathered with lots of people. He had an illustrious career, highly celebrated. But as all the eulogists began to speak from different moments of his life, somebody made the comment that we're all speaking essentially about the same person, which of course is the core definition of integrity, to be the same person in public or private. And they said, we're all talking about Tony as generous, because generous really captures who he is as a person. And so that's what I want us to be thinking about. I'm going to share my screen now. I'll share, because I like to both see and hear. It helps me remember things. Because there is so much minutia when it comes to parenting. You're in the thick of it too. Not sure what kind of day you had. But, you know, parenting is a long game. And remembering that parenting is a long game, when the bad grade comes home and the social drama flares up, and the, you know, if you're younger kids, the potty training is going awry, it's helpful to remember that there's this plan and there's reality. But the important piece of both of these pictures you see here is that the bicyclist is aiming somewhere. And knowing where you are aiming as a parent may seem like something obvious and cliche. And yet, as you look at, for example, some of the research out of Challenge Success, where they asked thousands of parents, what do you want most for your child? I'm sure they'd answer with many of the words you wrote down. I want them to be kind and responsible and patient. I want them to be happy and fulfilled. But they asked the kids the same question. And the children, the teenagers, tended to answer, what matters most to my parents? That I get good grades, that I get into a good college, that you know, I do, you know, well in this sports game. And there was this fundamental disconnect between what the parents and what the children felt was a priority. So it can be helpful to take some time as a parent to make the implicit explicit. So let me go back here. When my daughter was about 6, which actually can be quite a tough time in child development as they go from kind of this magical thinking to a time of more concrete understanding how the world works, she was using a lot of quite negative self-talk. And at one point she started talking about how stupid she was. And so I sat her down and I said, when you have thoughts like that to come in your brain, and we all have them sometimes, you have to practice bossing back your thoughts. You have to be able to talk back to them. And so I said, let's come up with a phrase that will help you boss back your thoughts. And I said, I'm going to start because you said stupid, so I'm going to say smart. And by smart, you're thoughtful, you think through things. And I said, what are 2 other words you think describe you? And she said, well, I'm kind. I said, yeah, you are. And then she said, sometimes I'm brave. And so I said, great, smart, kind, and brave. And this became a mantra when she was younger, that when she wasn't feeling great, I'd tickle her, we'd laugh, and I'd say, we're smart, kind, and brave. And a week after we had that moment, we went to Target, and this is actually my son, and they actually had shirts that said smart, kind, and brave, which I took as kind of a message from the universe, and we got those. Now, this is not something she, as a 10-year-old, full into her tween times, is going to use anymore, quite in the same way. But I was chatting with her this weekend and talking about this presentation. And I said, you know what the words are in our family? And she's like, yeah, Mom, smart, kind, and brave. And she was grumbling, but she was working on some homework for school, and they're writing autobiography. And she had to talk about values in her family. And I peeked into her homework, and I noticed that she wrote, in my family, it's important that we are kind and that we are brave. So this is that thing where often as parents, we think we're being explicit, but we think our kids understand, what matters to us. But sometimes taking the opportunity to really use the words, starting at a young age, but even in those middle school and high school years, this is what matters, really can make a difference. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the science behind kindness, and then talk a bit more about how kindness develops as a habit. So this is kind of, I'm sorry, shameless plugging here. This is actually a book I have coming out in February, because what we know is that kindness at its root begins with empathy. And empathy at its very kind of core form is an imaginative exercise. It's the ability to imagine how another person is feeling. And empathy, it turns out, when you look at the research, really has so rooted in talking about feelings, talking about their feelings, talking about your feelings, talking about other people's feelings, talking about the feelings of characters in books or in movies or in whatever you're watching together. Why is this? Because feelings and emotional vocabulary increases the emotional imagination. So, when your kids are 5, they might say, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy, or I'm scared. It's kind of your 4 core. But as you get older, your emotional vocabulary should expand. And, Lisa Barrett Feldman in Northeastern talks about emotional granularity, which is that you tend to have a better, you tend to be more responsive and less reactive if you can pinpoint with specificity and talk about your emotions. So are you angry at the world, or are you irritated about the phone call, or are you annoyed, or are you frustrated? What is the trigger, and what is the real feeling that you're having? So, if my daughter says, my friend stomped away, she's so mad, then the question gets imaginative. Is she mad, or is she jealous? Is she mad, or is she overstimulated? Is she mad, or is she hurt? And that expanded vocabulary, as we begin to, talk and really expand by saying, you look mad. Are you frustrated that this happened? Are you disappointed? And expand that vocabulary step by step allows them not just to understand their own reactions, but to begin to understand the potential reactions of the people around them. And this is important because not only does it help them become more kind and empathetic, it also increases their confidence and sense of power. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The research on the type of discipline and parenting that helps the most to help children develop kind of kindness and generosity is something called inductive discipline. And I could do a whole workshop on this. I'm not going to. I'm just going to give a quick highlights. But basically, inductive discipline is a form of teaching, and it helps kids connect the dots between what we do, our actions, and what other people feel. So if I do this, it could make the other person feel this. And this is at the heart of these interactions we have in helping our kids not be self-centered individuals. So in its simplest form, when the kids are young, it's taking whatever directive we have and it's adding the why. It takes an extra step, but the research is really clear that that extra step pays dividends. So don't hit becomes hitting isn't okay because it hurts your brother and makes him feel sad. So this is what you can't do. This is the outcome in terms of interpersonal feelings. Pick up your Legos may become, please pick up your Legos or I might step on one. And we all know how mom feels when she steps on a Lego. For your teenager or teenager, watch your mouth, young lady, might become, I know you're upset right now, but what you said was hurtful. And you don't want to be hurtful. That's not the kind of person you are. And so what you're showing is that their actions have consequences, that their actions have real consequences to their friends, to their family. This is empowering because it also works the other direction. It also shows that when a friend is feeling sad, that their actions can help them feel better, that they actually have a capacity to be useful and helpful. And, you know, in a world that has so much going on and kids can actually, I think, sometimes feel a sense of paralysis with everything going on, almost an empathy overload, right? With there's climate crisis and there are people who are sick and there are natural disasters. The ability to say, I can do something ends up being very empowering. So as I'm sure you know from your previous speakers and from your work with Dr. Peterson, anything that we look at as a character trait is essentially a habit, and habits are all formed by practice over time. We are rarely consistently always one way, but the more we practice something, the more it becomes what is, you know, Aristotle might call our second nature. So for helping kids practice kindness, I want to share 3 tips, and then we're going to scoot a little bit into the bravery aspect of this. And the first is to put other people on their radar. You know, Rick Weisborg, who is the head of Making Caring Common at Harvard University, I was speaking with him a couple of years ago, and he said, you know, all kids have empathy for somebody, and it's usually their friends. It's usually people that are in their circle. The real challenge becomes helping expand their circle of concern. The kids can be both naturally very empathetic and very self-centered, and that's not their fault. They live in their own small world. Putting other people on the radar, it can look as simple as saying, you know, oh, you know, the neighbor down the street, I know that she broke her leg the other week. So yeah, we're making cookies. Why don't we bring a few over to them? Or, you know, talking about things that are happening in the news. Or I'm at the store the other day and their school's having a drive for Afghan refugees. And so I say, I'm picking up some extra paper towels for the Afghan refugees. James, my 7-year-old, do you know what a refugee is? Let's talk about that. And the more we begin to put other people on their radar, you know, to be able to talk about the news in concrete ways and, you know, what could we do to help? So I'm noticing this, or we're raking leaves. Hey, our neighbor's a little elderly. We could do that as well. Or as a super concrete example, I'm thinking about my neighbor who, you know, was so good about having her daughter reach out to a new child and saying frequently, like, who are they sitting with on the bus? And who are they playing with at recess? Really concrete questions to put this other child on that child's radar. And that child was my daughter, when we had just moved. And my daughter is more introverted than my son. And my neighbor just asking these questions of, where is she at recess? Really helped her 6-year-old daughter reach out to my 6-year-old daughter in a very concrete way she might not have been able to do on her own. I also want to talk about teaching basic kindness skills. And, you know, well, kindness is a virtue. There are skills that can go into it. And one of the things that I think a lot of us are noticing post-COVID, and I'm seeing this a lot when I pop in to do workshops with 7th graders, is that there is some stunting that has happened because of COVID, because we have kept them away from other people and we've kept them in pods, we've kept them in our family for very good reasons. But there is some really basic teaching that I think as parents is required of us in a way it may not have been even a couple of years ago. And so I've been thinking about this with my own kids, how to introduce yourself to a stranger, to say, hi, my name is. Speaking very concretely about how to include others. We were at the beach this summer. My kids were playing. They're so used to being a pod of two. And there was another boy who just kept hovering. And they looked at each other like they wanted to play, but it was kind of alien. So I turned to my son and said, just ask, do you want to build sandcastles with us? And he needed that prompting of how to include someone else. And whether they're trying to include somebody with their 7th grade who's new or kindergarten, there is some prompting now that I think we can be doing some uptick on. Showing gratitude, being able to say thank you. I took our kids out to dinner for one of the first times about a month ago. And I was amazed that my kids were not saying thank you to the waiter. And it was, I kept saying it. It's part of my habit. It's what I do. And so I explained why, right? If somebody does think for you, it's part of noticing them. It's part of honoring their dignity. And my son looked over and said, well, the kid at that table, he didn't do it. And I said, well, the waiter's going to remember you for a good reason and remember that kid for another reason. But this is part of what we do in our family to show kindness. We show gratitude. The be a helper part, I just want to mention here because there's really good research that doing chores around the house is related to the development of generosity and kindness, particularly chores that are family oriented and not just, in their room. And I have some hypotheses about why this is true. And one of my hypotheses goes back to a conversation I had with KG Dell'Antonio, who used to write the Motherload blog at the New York Times, where she was writing about how many children now, not growing up on a family farm anymore, don't necessarily have roles in the family, right? They are served. They are given their dinner. They're, the chores are done for them. They don't necessarily have a sense that my family needs me. And, that feeling of being needed is a very empowering feeling. It's a sense of, am I just somebody that, am annoying to my parents, or, am I just a lot of work, or could my family function well without me? There was a time this summer where our new puppy escaped at night into the woods, and instantly my 7 and 10-year-old mobilized. They grabbed their shoes. My daughter grabbed some treats. My son grabbed a leash, and we were out there. I didn't have to cajole. We were all hands on deck. And we came back in, and my daughter said, after we got the dog, that was so scary and so exciting. That was one of the best nights of my life. And I realized it was this moment that was both scary, but she felt like she was doing something good. And I think there are those moments we can build for our kids where we let them know that they're needed, right? So it's not just set the table. It's, I have a lot happening here. When you set the table, it helps the whole evening go smoother. And, I noticed that you walked the dog when I didn't ask you to. And I'm just so grateful because, it's really hard to do this alone. And I'm so glad you were here to help. That feeling of being a helper really helps inspire kindness. And finally, stepping up when they see hurtful behavior. And there's a whole other talk you can give about, about bullying and aggression and different roles that are played. But I just want to share one piece of research here that I think is tremendously powerful. And that is, when somebody is being the aggressor and someone else is the target, usually the vast majority are what we call our bystanders. And, if we can teach our kids how to intervene, if we can teach them how to be brave and stand up, that's fantastic, right? That's ideal. But many kids are not going to get there. There are a lot of reasons, the social pressure, their temperament, where they are. But when researchers have asked children who have been targeted, what has made a difference that your classmates have done? The answer is really clear, and that is to go up afterwards and to be kind, to even stand next to them afterwards, or to sit with them afterwards, even if they don't talk about what happened at all. Just the act of standing next to reminded them that they weren't alone. And that's what's most frightening often when you are targeted, is you feel like, I am alone, nobody likes me, you generalize it. And so they did this intervention, one group where they basically taught fourth graders, what to do, just to go up to somebody afterwards, right? Even if they didn't intervene at all. And there was a greater a greater response from those kids. They were suddenly equipped with something they could do, and many of them did it. And that's the type of thing I think we sometimes assume. My kid's a good kid. My kid is not going to be the one who is the aggressor. But that's not where we need to stop, right? We need to be also thinking about how do we equip them when we see something uncomfortable and their instinct is just to walk away and leave it be, which I think is many of our kids' instinct. And then the final tip I have on this one is the tremendous power of treating people with dignity. And I use that word very intentionally because, as Donna Hicks at Harvard points out in her book, Dignity, respect is something that is earned, but dignity is something that we all have inherently inside of us. Our dignity is something that's part and parcel of our humanity. And the ability to see that and look for that, especially with people we disagree with, is a great model for our kids, especially in such a polarized society that we are in. And I'll tell you one parenting change I consciously made about 3 years ago. I was taught a 6th grade workshop on dignity, and it was a word that most of the girls had never heard of. And so, we talked about what it meant, we talked about what it looked like. And I realized I was thinking about this. Ted Sizer wrote a book called The Students Are Watching. And it's a great book. Don't remember anything except for one example. And he said, in a school, we call the principal and the teachers Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so. We tend to call the lunch ladies by their first name, and we don't know the names of the janitorial staff. And that really hit me hard as a young teacher because I realized it was even true for me in my profession. And so I shared that with the girls, that story. And then I made a commitment that anytime I went into a grocery store or anytime I talked to customer service on the phone, I would look at the name tag of the person who was checking me out, or when they answered and said, "Hello, this is Comcast, Jason speaking," I would consciously rehearse that and remember it. So at the end, I would thank them by name. And that was it. That was a fundamental commitment change that I wanted my kids to see, that I always called the people who helped us or who I interacted with as much as I could by name. And, my daughter in her autobiography and writing about her mom, as I was peeking at that one too, wrote, she's hyper and she loves to talk to strangers in grocery stores. So at least some of that's getting through, I guess. But I also want to point out that sometimes kindness takes courage, because I asked a group of 7th graders last year, does making good choices always make you happy? And they wanted to say yes, because I think we've taught them that, right? If you do good things, that's the key to happiness. And then I started to give them some examples of, I said, does it make you happy if you tell your mom that you lost her favorite pair of earrings? It's honest. It's a really, really good thing to do. And, being kind to someone else sometimes takes the courage of stepping outside your friend group or your comfort zone. And that's where, as Weisbord said, it's very easy to show kindness to people you like, but it takes more courage to treat people, or when you are feeling a certain amount of anxiety, to respond that way consistently. So when kids fail at this, as we all do, I remind parents, because sometimes when I was an assistant principal, they would be aghast and say, "That can't be my kid. My kid is kind." And I'd say, "Of course they are. Of course they are. They made a mistake because they're growing." And you got to think about it as sources of interference. It's not that they don't want to be, or even aren't most of the time, but sources of interference come in. And that interference can be social drama. That interference can be feeling overtired or overwhelmed. And very often that interference is some form of anxiety. And anxiety is something that is a hijack so often to our kids' better natures. And there's so many triggers for it. And when we think about anxiety and stress, it's kind of the topic du jour right now. Right now, as you read everything, I want to do a little bit of reframing. I was talking to Lisa D'Amour a couple years ago about her amazing book, Under Pressure, The Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. And as we were talking, we began to talk about this word brave that I'm talking about tonight. And she said, you know, brave is such an appealing word for kids. And it is, right? Think about all the kids in their superhero outfits. They want to be brave. It feels so good. It's a core word. Anxiety, and so part of it is helping them realize that anxiety is here to stay, right? You're going to have this your whole life, these situations where you don't know what to do and you're uncomfortable. But brave, that feeling ends up being, practicing that over and over again, part of the antidote to anxiety. And so before I can talk about that, I just want to do really a 3-minute quick primer on the biology of stress, just to make sure we're on the same page. Because most kids I know think of stress as the most terrible word on the planet. They are stressed about being stressed. And if they are not stressed, I'm working with college seniors right now on their college application process, they're worried that they're not stressed. They're stressed about not being stressed. And they think it's a bad thing unilaterally. So part of what I like to do with kids, and my kids too as a parent, is to demystify what stress is. Because stress is absolutely normal. It's a normal biological response to perceived threats and challenges. So this is the thing that gets us ready to act. And as I tell girls, like, and I keep saying girls because I'm working at a girls' school at the moment, so I apologize. I have a son and I've worked with boys often in my life as well. But as I was talking to this group about, if a train's coming down quickly and you have a 2-year-old next to you, and you really want your stress to kick in. You want to not be thinking, you want to be instinctive. You don't want to be analyzing the velocity of the train as it approaches, you want to move. So that's what stress does. It gets us ready to act, and it really hijacks our prefrontal cortex. So the 3 common responses, of course, to stress, as I'm sure you all know, are to fight, to flee, or to freeze. And, this is really helpful it can be really helpful even in performance situations to get a little of that rush of adrenaline. But if they are fighting, if they have math homework and they're stressed, and so they're fighting with their brother, or they're fleeing to YouTube videos, or they are freezing up and get performance anxiety or unable to work, that's not particularly helpful to them, right? That's where the anxiety begins to interfere. This fight, flight, or freeze, when it's not a situation where that rush of adrenaline is really necessary for them. And often as parents, we don't see it as anxiety, we see it as something else. So we see them yelling and we reprimand them for yelling because it's coming out as mad. Or we see them fleeing and we reprimand them for not being responsible, but it's really anxiety. Or they freeze up and we say, you're just not focused, but really what's happening is an underlying anxiety. So, as I share with students, you have this amygdala, which is your threat response center, and that can just take over. So, it's pulling the fire alarm indiscriminately. And maybe that's just burnt toast in the faculty room that's turning the fire alarm, or maybe there's a real fire. The amygdala is not necessarily going to tell you that. The prefrontal cortex is your watchtower to be able to say, yes, there's a real emergency, or no, you can stand down. But as one amazing child psychologist, shared with me, a great phrase to use with kids when they're feeling that incredible overload is, let's take a little moment to settle your glitter. And so, if any of you have, I gotta say, I would say young children, but middle schoolers love this. All this glitter jar is a bunch of glitter, a thing of Elmer's glue and water, and a nice seal at the top with maybe a glue gun. And this idea that this is what your brain looks like, that you take some deep breaths, or you take a walk, you give yourself a time, it begins to settle lower and lower. And as we're the calm in their storm, it helps settle it. And as if you haven't read Ned Johnson and Dale Stickstred's new book, what do you say? I highly recommend it. And one of the things that they emphasize so much, as do, everyone in the field, is that empathy, this kindness to our children, really helps settle down their glitter to prepare them to be brave. And empathy at its most basic form, when you're there with your kids, can sound like, I notice they seem upset. I'd love to hear about it if you'd like to chat. That sounds tough. Just validating how they're feeling. I'm sorry that happened. You have a right to feel how you feel. I can see why you're upset or angry or frustrated or discouraged. I think I get it. Are you saying, yeah, if that happened to me, I'd be upset too? Or, and again, this one I stole from Lisa D'Amore, and I use this one so often. That stinks. How do you want to handle it? And the magic of that one, that stinks, how do you want to handle it, is it acknowledges, it's kind. It acknowledges the emotion that this was tough, but it also acknowledges their autonomy and efficacy, self-efficacy, that you believe they can handle it. It's expressing confidence in them. It's saying to them, I know this is tough, but I believe you can be brave. I'm here with you, and I think you have the capacity. And I took a walk with a high school senior the other day who was highly stressed about many things. And as we walked around the block a couple of times, I used this phrase maybe 5 times. I don't think she noticed. I did it over and over. She would talk. I'd say, that's tough. How do you want to handle it? Ooh, yeah, that's tricky. How are you going to handle that one? And she solved her problems. She began to make plans. All she needed was a listening ear and the confidence that I believed that she could be brave and begin to handle these situations. Because one thing kids get wrong about courage, because of the superhero movies and the rest, is that being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. In fact, if you aren't scared, there is no bravery, right? So, for a kid who loves standing up in front of people, standing up in front of a school assembly is not brave. They're on cloud 9. But for a child for whom they have that performance anxiety of standing up, or they're more introverted, or they just don't like to be in that spotlight, getting up and speaking is tremendously brave, and it needs to be honored. So brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you try to do the right thing anyway. Or as Susan David, who I adore, her book is Emotional Agility. If you've not seen her TED Talk, please watch it. She puts it this way, that courage is not the absence of fear, that courage is fear walking. And I love that. So a couple of tips on this before I open it up in a few minutes to question and answer. It is really, really important to remember that bravery looks different for different kids. And I think about this a lot because I write a lot about temperament, introversion and extroversion. And we often look at our extroverts and we look at them as leaders and we look at them as brave. And there are a lot of very anxious extroverts out there. And we often look at our introverts and we think, oh, we put them more on the cowardly scale. And I've got to say that some of our introverts who are willing to speak up, even when it's not comfortable, are practicing bravery over and over again, day after day. So it's not so much that there is any one action that is brave. It's more about what is the thing that is tough for your child to do, and how do you help them take the baby steps towards it? So for some, it might be meeting a new teacher. You might have a kid right now who's just struggling to go to school in the morning. School anxiety is on the rise right now, partly due to being away from school for so long. Trying activity for a first time, learning a new skill that takes effort. For some, it's asking for help. It's going up and asking a teacher. Their heart begins to race. Admitting they made a mistake, that can be tough. Reaching out to a classmate who needs a friend, and telling the truth. And I throw this one on there because, honesty is a big one for a lot of us parents for good reason. If you can tell me the truth, I can help you, as I tell my kids a lot. But one of the main interferences for our kids telling us the truth is that it's scary. That if they have to tell us something difficult, it feels tremendously scary. And so if a child comes and tells you something and it was hard, and maybe they should have told you 3 days ago and they didn't, I would just implore you to, before you do anything else, honor their bravery and say, that took a lot of courage. Thank you. I hear you. I appreciate your honesty. Now let's talk about what needs to happen next. But, the fact that they are coming and they got through it and they didn't keep the secret, honoring that as bravery, I think is a tremendous gift we can give to our kids. It's also really key. I know we have, kindergarten through 8th grade parents here, to preview what to expect when you know there is something that is anxiety provoking for your child. And as granular as you can, say, okay, so you're going to go to a new dance studio today. This is what I know about it. Okay, so you're going to go in, you are taking the PSATs tomorrow. So let's talk about what that means. So you're going to your first funeral soon. Let me walk through what you're going to expect there. Because kids very often, when something is unexpected, they will fill the void with their own imagination. As Mr. Rogers said, what's mentionable is manageable. And if we're not talking about it with them, they're talking about it with either other people or so often with their own imagination. And they're making it bigger and they're making it scarier. And that's where I would lead right into kind of tip 3, which is that we know that avoidance feeds anxiety, that as parents, often our instinct is to say, that makes you anxious, you don't have to do it. But when they don't do it consistently, in their brain, it gets bigger and bigger. And as Lisa D'Amour writes so beautifully in her book, anxiety is often, it's that we overestimate how hard something's going to be, and we underestimate our capacity to handle it. And you think about that, you think about a phone call you have been delaying making, and it's getting bigger and bigger in your mind, and you finally make it, and it wasn't quite as hard as you thought it would be. Kids do this with their homework. They procrastinate it. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger in their mind. And, then they have a meltdown about it. If they actually sit down, it won't take them that long. I had a college senior who came last year, and she was just in a complete meltdown mode. She had done brilliantly. She had everything ready but her essay. She hadn't even started her essay. Applications were due 2 days later, and she was stuck. And so I said, I'm going to ask you to do something really brave right now. I'm going to put you outside my office. I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes. I want you to put your phone away, shut down everything but your Google Doc. And I just want you to sit for 25 minutes and write. You don't have to finish it. Even if you only get 3 sentences down, you just have to start. And I timed her. And 25 minutes later, she had half her essay done. She just needed to get past that hump. And sometimes that timing, saying a small amount, rather than this whole thing seems big, courage, helping them means helping them take that first step. So with my kids, especially when they were younger, and I use it all the time, even now, I just say, can you be brave for 30 seconds? So my daughter doesn't want to go up the stairs because it's dark. I say, I'm going to time you. Can you be brave for 30 seconds to go up and get your thing and come back down? My son was getting the flu shot last week. Last year, he had no problem getting the flu shot. This time, he completely froze up. He had tears in his eyes. And so I held his hand and I said, can you be brave for 10 seconds? He nodded, and the nurse saw what I was doing. So he looked at me and we started to count together. We got to 4 and she was done. But it was this buildup in his brain where he just needed that first step. And so, I do this with students all the time where you'll say, can't get started, can you put your name on the paper, all right? Or I know you don't want to go, but let's just get your shoes on, right? Let's just get in the car. Let's just drive there. Step by step, right? What's the next thing that's going to happen? And once they see that it's not as bad as they imagined, they've just had a chance practicing being brave. And that is tremendously valuable for the next time they have to be. And I'm just going to finish up here with a reminder. As a former English teacher and as a current writer, I love all the research on the power of stories to help inspire kindness and courage. From the research on how literacy helps build empathy to some fantastic study out of a psychologist from Emory University, looking at how when kids know more about their family stories, like where their parents met or what a grandparent did for a living, that it turns out they were more resilient. And his hypothesis on why knowing more family stories increased childhood resilience was that it helped them feel part of something larger than themselves. And that some of the most powerful stories were the struggle stories, where they heard about somebody in the Great Depression or a family that immigrated over, or that, dealt with adversity, who dealt with a bankruptcy, and seeing that that's part of their story. Because the other technique I use so often with my kids is simply reminding them of their own stories. So that when my daughter feels like I can't do this, I can say, you remember that time? Do you remember what you did? Do you remember that time? Do you remember how you handled it? And this reminding them of stories from their own childhood, that they did this, they've been kind, they've been brave many, 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 many times, can help inspire them for the next time. So eventually they can do that without you there at all. And I want to make sure I leave a little bit of time here. So Charlene, I'm going to bounce it back to you to see if there are any questions that I can answer. Am I going to stop sharing? So there we go.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Deborah. That was really wonderful. This is a night where I wish we were all together so we could come up to the stage and ask some questions. I have a few, but is there something that you want to start with, Adrienne?
I do. I just want to, I loved it. I was like, while you look for the questions, I wanted to add in my own few comments. This was a wonderful presentation, and I know our parents gained so much from it. I was madly taking notes down. I was copiously taking everything down. I just loved all the tips. I loved your comments on habits. I had recently written about habits and in the Friday message board. I loved calling them by name. This is their school, their community. I loved your frame of source of interferences. I love that, instead of saying what was bugging you, what's the source of interference? I just love some of those key words that you were saying. But I do think in your kindness section, and we heard this from other speakers that Charlene has brought us in, is really asking the kids, especially in this development stage, what did you do for someone else? Like, how did you show your action? Like, what did you do? So that they see that that's important to you as a parent, right? What did you do instead of when they get in the car today? How did you do on your math test, or where are you putting that? I love that discourse that you shared with us in the beginning of, what do you value, and do your children know that? So, great presentation. I think there are some questions coming in, so I will stop. But thank you again. Everything was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. Some parent just commented, of all the presentations we've had, this was the best. And you're in very good company, Deborah. So that's a lovely comment. Here's a question. This parent asked, can you expand about how to handle a young child who gets frustrated and starts talking negatively about themselves? I'm stupid, etc. I love your suggestion of the boss back your thoughts. So again, the question is, how do you help a young child who gets frustrated and starts talking negatively about themselves? I know you touched on that.
Yeah, one is to remember that, in the heat of the moment, the most important thing is to help that stress response calm down, right? So if it's the middle of a huge meltdown, sometimes the rubbing of the back, the listening, letting them calm down. For me, I gotta tell you, we got a pandemic puppy, and it's made such a difference to be able to say, play with the dog for a few minutes, right? To calm that down a bit. But teaching, because sometimes the best teaching is not in the middle of it, right? Because sometimes in the middle of a stress response, they don't want to hear your suggestions, and they may even reflexively say, that's stupid, I don't want to hear that. But then when they're calmer, I can say, I heard you saying some of this. And sometimes I do that too. It's really easy to sometimes say those. But did you know that you can boss back your thoughts? That you might have a thought, but you don't have to keep it. You can say, that's not true. And that's why I created that really memorable phrase with my daughter, because and she helped create it. It would be something different now that she's older. There'd be other techniques that I use with her. But at that age, that can be really powerful to have something concrete that says, actually, I'm not. I'm smart, kind, and brave, or I'm whatever it is, because that's just, sometimes it's almost or reflexive. They get caught in the self-talk, and all kids do it. We all have these self-talk pieces, and just knowing that we can talk back to ourselves, I think is its own feeling of freedom. But that's very helpful to do after the storm has calmed. And I'll tell you, I know this looks silly, but my kids, if I'm upset, they'll bring it to me, because it's a helpful visual to let's calm myself down.
That absolutely. And parents, you can make your own glitter jars. It really works. A parent is asking if you could share that empathy settles slide again. That may be too tricky right now to do, Deborah.
Which one?
The empathy settles. It may mean that she's
the phrases.
The empathy settles slide again so that we can.
Some of the phrases that help settle empathy. Hold on. I go back here. Yeah. This one, empathy settles glitter. Yeah.
I think
so. These are really good phrases. And actually, I'll just leave these up for a second. Well, if you want to ask me another question, so they can.
All right. And Deborah mentioned the new book by Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, who actually came. They were here in this series 2 years ago. Their new book, again, What Do You Say?, has a lot of this language to help parents. Recommend that book highly too. And their advice about trying to be the non-anxious presence in your child's life. Okay, great questions coming in. Deborah, here's another one. This parent asks, such a great presentation. My question is, how do you get your child to open up to you about school and their feelings? When I ask, how was your day? We mostly get fine.
Yeah, no, you do, right? Because, and I posed this question to my to a group of 7th graders last year. I was running a workshop, and I said, if your parents ask you, how was your day? What do you say? They all said, fine. And I said, why do you do that? And I said, well, we're tired when we get in the car. And then I said, think about your day. It has ups, it has downs, it has pits, it has valleys. They live so many emotions in one day. And it can be really hard to put it into one. And so often when they get in the car, I know my kids' schedule, I printed it out because it helps me. So I might say, so tell me about science today, or did anything funny happen in music? Because I know their music teacher is very funny. Or I might say, who did you sit with at lunch today? Because that's really helpful for me to see social dynamics. And I try not to let it be a grilling session, right? Often they will tell me more about their day at dinner time or at bedtime rather than right after school. And sometimes I'll just start sharing about my day, and I'll just start leading and say, when my kids were younger, and we still do this sometimes, we'd all share a yay, an oops, and a blah, because I was trying to normalize that days had all three. So a yay would be something good that happened, and oops would be a mistake that we made, and a blah would be just something that didn't go well. And so I sometimes say, does anybody have a yay today? Does anybody have an oops today? Did anybody have a blah today? And my son got really good at, when he didn't want to tell me something, but he did want to tell me something, he would say, Mom, did you have any blahs today? And I would say, yeah, actually, I totally was late to a meeting, and I hate to be late. And then he would tell me his blah, but he wanted me to share first. So those are a couple of ideas.
Those are great. Here's a question I bet a lot of people are asking, Deborah. How do you encourage a child to take risks? Our son doesn't want to try anything new, whether it's food or an overnight or taking lessons or even going to see the grandparents. How do you encourage a child to take risks?
It's baby steps. And part of it, I think they're the things that that they need to do, maybe go see the grandparents, right? Where you get in the car and you go, and he realizes he has a better time than he thought he would because he made it different in his brain. But then there's also the really paying attention to what is getting him interested. Being a bit of an anthropologist of your own child. And a person who writes really beautifully about this, actually a book I would recommend to this parent, is Michelle Borba's new book, Thrivers. She has some great suggestions on this about really following the child and looking and saying, okay, it looks like they have an interest in blank. What's one way I can push that a little bit further? They seem to really like Pokemon. Well, maybe, what is something who's somebody else he hasn't really close friends yet that I could invite over to do this. So kind of picking picking an interest that's already there and pushing that a little bit. But part of it is if it's something like he needs to do is just there is some exposure therapy of baby stepping your child to that, of being able to, because the more they avoid it, the bigger it gets in their brain. And sometimes they just have to experience and realize it wasn't as hard as they thought it was.
It also makes me think of Madeline Levine, who wrote The Price of Privilege. And she says, parents say all the time, my kid doesn't want to do anything. And she would say, so get a bigger platter. In other words, just like you're saying, give them more options.
Yeah.
Or let them come up with what the options may be.
Yeah.
Here's a very good question, a little bit nuanced. How do you find a good balance with not pushing our kids to be more brave while not creating a new fear or real fear? So the balance between pushing versus creating more fear.
I mean, for me, I look at bravery as, so bravery is when you're nervous about something and you take steps, and it's something that maybe you want to try to do, and you take a few steps toward it anyway. And I think the question is, are you asking them to take a flying leap, right? Are you asking them to go from stage fright to being a lead? Or are you asking them to, just, sing a karaoke song with you in front of, grandma, right? In other words, when you ask them to do the whole leap, and if that leap is too big and it falls, that's going to increase their anxiety. So if and they have this interest too, right? Like kids don't like feeling anxious. They'll go and retreat, but they'd rather not feel that way. So if you can start baby stepping it for them and helping them think that too. I mean, I'm saying this if you have to map it out. Actually, it's much better if they do. And if they're like, okay, well, what's your first step on this? And what's the next thing you want to try? That's a real feeling of empowerment to finally be able to say, I did this. And you got to be prepared that when they're doing something that's tough for them, there's going to be a lot of really heavy emotions. When my daughter decided she wanted to learn how to ride a bike at age 8, after all of her friends had done it and she had adamantly refused because she was terrified of it, she hated me for a week while she was learning how. Just hated me, not because she hated me, because there was so much built up anxiety. And I had to step back and say, she's really pushing through this because it matters to her. And every time I try to help her, it's going to be my fault. And if I don't help her, it's going to be my fault. But she's finally owning it, and it's not me. So I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to absorb it a little bit because she's doing something tough right now. And when she's done, I'm going to celebrate it to no end because she will get there. And in the meantime, I'm going to stand here and just remind her that I'm here, as she takes this journey.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Deborah. Just quickly, a parent is asking, what is the name of Michelle Borba's book again?
Thrivers.
Thrivers.
Yes. It's a great book. And if you Google my name and her name, you'll find an article on Mindshift. So if you're looking for some cliff notes, there's an article from an interview I did with her a few months ago.
Again, if any of you missed the beginning, Deborah is a wonderful education writer and longtime teacher. If you Google her name and Mindshift or PBS Kids, you'll find lots of her writing online. We have come to the end of our hour together, and I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Peterson for some final comments.
I just want to say again, thank you, Deborah, for being with us. Everyone has made comments how great it was. So thank you for all your tips. I liked the slides. I liked everything about the presentation. There are some really worthwhile things that we can use in the classroom, and our teachers can definitely use. So thank you again for your time. I hope you get some rest before school starts. I know you're closing in on a late evening. So and all the things work out better for you. The weather calms down.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Deborah. The video will be available soon, parents, so that you can watch it again or show it to a partner or your kids. Thank you again to St. Matthew Catholic School. We appreciate being with you tonight. Good night, everyone.
Good night.